I'm Hayes Hartwig. This is Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast. I'm your host, Hayes Hartwig, and today we have Peter from VRI to go over the latest stats and other goings-ons in the landlord world. So, welcome back, Peter. What's cracking?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me back again. I guess it's basically like a every month thing.
You're
now.
Kind of a host now, dude. I wrangled you in.
A little bit of a co-host, yeah. But yeah, I've been enjoying coming on and talking about the stats each month and throwing up some stories and stuff like that we've got. So
yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, the stories from the front, as it were.
Yeah.
So the rent has increased by an entire $10 in Metro Vancouver, according to the stats from live.rent. From May to June, the average right now is $2,377 for a one-bedroom unfurnished unit. This also is only $7 more than it was from June from last year. So kind of is running with the usual trend, but interesting that there's a little bit of a stall, as it were. Have you been seeing that out there? The prices kind of
for sure
leveling out a bit?
For sure, yeah. It's really noticeable when doing re-rentals for stuff that I rented last year.
Yeah.
So if the leases, I started a bunch of leases in May and June last year. Mm-hmm. Sometimes people leave after just 1 year once their lease is finished and then now trying to re-rent them again. It's really obvious when the owner messages me and says, hey, you know, how much can we increase the rent by? And I say, to be honest, not that much or not as much as maybe you'd think. So I've definitely seen the price stagnate a little more than usual. I mean, I'm sure I could look back in the stats, but kind of off the top of my head, usually after a year or so, we kind of tend to increase the rent by 10 or 15%
for sure
in between tenancies. But this year, you know, and the stats back it up, it's definitely been less than that.
Yeah.
I think things that we've talked about a bunch of times, but mostly just because there's a lot of units on the market right now, which is driving the price down. But I think we're going to talk about that a little bit later as well.
Absolutely. Especially like you and I both just had that one around Brentwood where mass quantities of units just came on at one go. I mean, 2 full towers ready for possession at the same time. It was like kaboom. Absolutely diluted the market, which tended to make the prices a little bit softer. Obviously, did you get your place rented at Concord, the one that you were going on about?
I did, yeah. I did pretty shortly after our conversation last month. Got it rented for $3,200. Okay. Definitely less than what the owner was kind of hoping for, but to be honest, it was right in line with what we were seeing online. The people who were getting it rented for less were getting it rented quicker, and I'm sure there's still ads online for prices up at 33, 34, 35. Those ones are probably just still sitting there empty.
Oh, for sure. I mean, last time that I looked over at those 2 buildings, I think there was like 65 or 67 available. That's a lot of choices.
It's a lot of units, yeah. And especially, you know, it's hard to differentiate yourself when, you know, really you can only differentiate yourself on price and, you know, slight changes in view and orientation of the units. But, you know, they're pretty much all the same. Some buildings are just super, super investor heavy. I'm pretty sure that building must be like 70% rentals over owners. I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's also a tip for any of the tenants listening that right now you can probably get yourself a bit of a discount in Brentwood.
Yeah, for sure.
Cheaper rent.
To be honest, Brentwood's been one of those areas for, I think, the last couple of years, to be honest, that there's just always seems to be a new building popping up. And whenever those new building pops up, it dilutes the rental pool, as you said. And the prices go down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny too with the Brentwood area, just because it was heralded as like such a great place to invest and all that. But as we touched on, there's so many of them now. It's quite diluted, and there's always another crane. It seems like it's never ending.
Yeah. Yeah, honestly, for this particular unit at Concord, this 2-bedroom unit that I'm talking about that I rented for $3,200 back in, I think it was October or November when the owner first reached out about it.
Yeah.
He was kind of, in his mind, budgeting like 38.
Jeez.
And even in October back then, before we'd seen how saturated it was going to get, even back then I said, make sure to temper your expectations because there's, tons of new buildings in Brentwood anyways. And to be honest, it was even more saturated than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Called it back in October and November. I was pretty sure how this was gonna go.
Yeah. Now, did you use any of like the virtual staging or any of those other added sort of go-ons, or just sort of...
I didn't. I used like every rental website possible. Ended up getting it rented. I think it was through Craigslist, but it might have been Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah, I find that Facebook Marketplace is getting less lunatics.
Yeah, to be honest, I've seen Facebook Marketplace. I think I've got a couple recent tenants out of Facebook Marketplace. So I think maybe people might be starting to hop over from Craigslist and not use Craigslist as much.
Yeah.
This year has been a little bit different, been a little bit slower in terms of rentals in general, like just because of the pricing is what we've been talking about. But I've definitely seen Craigslist fall off a little bit.
Yeah.
In terms of waking up in the morning to like 10 Craigslist responses. For some places, I still get lots.
Yeah.
But it's definitely less than maybe it was last year.
Yeah, I think one of the things that maybe brought it in for Facebook Marketplace, or I guess Meta Marketplace now, I guess they're calling it, but the fact that you can actually report on the inquiries now. And one of them is no response. So I think they're starting to get the idea that, hey, is this available? And then ghost is getting annoying for everybody involved.
Yeah, you always see people advertising in their ads, and it says, if the post is online, it means it's available. Do not send, is this available?
Yeah, absolutely.
That is one of my biggest pet peeves, honestly, when people send that.
But yeah, mine is just the ghosting, though. It's like, I'll answer. Yeah, it is. And then that's it. Like, so I guess you just wanted to see if I was around or something, you were lonely or whatever.
Yeah. I think when people send an email through Craigslist, there's a lot more intention there, right? Yeah, it's just like the difference between emailing and text, right? You're more likely to text somebody something casual. Hey, how's it going? Yeah. You're not going to send them an email that says, hey, how's it going?
Yeah.
I mean, probably not. And if you do, don't do that.
Yeah. Right. Or you're a boomer.
Yeah. But when you send an email, it shows more intention. It takes longer.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have to attach, you attach a signature to it. It's a little more professional.
Yeah.
Whereas on Facebook Marketplace, people are definitely, they sauce a couple questions up there and whatever, and, do a thumbs up, right? It's a lot more casual. But I think we may be starting to see Facebook Marketplace take over in terms of the number one rental platform.
Yeah, we should start tracking that. Maybe I will start this month. We'll see where we're at.
Yeah, I do find Facebook Marketplace though can be very inconsistent.
Yeah,
I feel like sometimes they've got an algorithm that sorts who's going to see your ad and stuff that, which I don't really like. I like that on Craigslist. I put my ad there. It's posted in the same spot everybody else's is.
Yeah. It's not pay to play.
It's not higher than anybody else's based on all these keywords or whatever it is. Right. So that's one thing I don't like about Facebook, because it's hard to tell. I can't tell if my ad's not getting traction because it's not getting traction, or because the price is too high, or because I'm stuck in some weird algorithm
black hole
hell, or something like that. I'm not sure, but definitely still a platform that I would recommend using.
Yeah, for sure. I actually ended up using the virtual staging. I talked about whether I was going to or not. So I found virtual staging .ai, which I believe it was. It's actually super easy to use. It's only $35 a month. I just went on the month, of course. I think it's $25 if you sign up for the full year. But you can basically click it, and 10 seconds later they'll produce usually 3 different sort of setups, and you can pick out of those 3 or redo it. And they have different styles as well. So you can pick traditional or Euro or minimal or whatever it may be. So in all honesty, I found that was really helpful, because just as we talked about the ones out on Concord there, that there's 65 some odd units, they all look exactly the same. All of a sudden mine has a couch in it.
Yeah. And all those ones are empty, right? All those Concord ones are empty. Nobody's furnished them yet.
Yeah.
No one's lived there. There's nobody's lived there yet, so there's no furniture. And to be honest, I saw the pictures that you had, and it was cool. It was kind of nice to be able to flip back and forth between the empty one and the staged one.
Yeah.
Kind of
in the liability.
In the same ad. Yeah, of course. But it is, I think I've said this before on the show, but rooms always seem really small when they're empty, because you don't have anything to compare it to. But when you throw a couch in there, you go, oh, there's actually enough room for this couch and a little ottoman and a chair. And it's hard to tell that when it's just an empty room.
Yeah, I mean, I also found, I especially wanted to use it for this one just because it's one of those designs that still has a pillar inside. A couple buildings that we have that pillar. It's just a design thing that makes my head hurt, but that's beyond the point. I'm not an architect, but
I'm sure there's a structural reason for the pillar.
I know, but I put the pillar on the outside of the pillar, not on the inside of it.
Yeah.
Right. But I find that when that pillar is there, if it's empty, a lot of people have troubles figuring out, like, where's my couch going to go? Because now there's a pillar in this room. Right. So it's a little bit tricky sometimes. So I find that the staging, I think, definitely helped with those ones in particular. Or if you have some of the oddly shaped rooms, some
for sure,
trapezoid and stuff like this.
Yeah.
Which, again, afterthought.
For sure. Yeah, it's nice to be able to see how furniture could possibly fit into a space if it's a bit of a weird unit shape or layout or whatever. So
yeah, for sure. Like some of the ones at Carnarvon have this, it's really strange looking. People figure it out, but I think with some insight on how to do it might sort of help people get their head wrapped around the situation.
For sure.
Speaking of furniture rentals, not surprisingly, they have seen some downward pressure on prices as many came off the Airbnb to long-term basically overnight. Have you seen any of this with the furnished units? You don't deal with too many of them, but have you?
Not too many. I mean, to be honest, I get lots of calls for people saying, hey, I've got a furnished place that I want to rent out. And usually I advise them, if it's for long-term rental, which is what we mostly do, usually advise them to unfurnish it or at least be flexible. Yeah. I always say be flexible. I always say this, that somebody might come in, they might be the perfect tenant, they might absolutely love your unit, and they might hate your furniture. And if you're unwilling to move the couch or the bed or whatever it is, you may lose out on a great tenant at a good price, right? A lot of people reach out to me for furnished units, for tenants, and they reach out and say, I love the unit so much, I'll pay the same price if there's no furniture in it. I already have a couch that I've spent $20,000 on. I've already have a bed that I really like that is my perfect sleep number or whatever it is, right? These furniture can be very personal for some people. Obviously, if the unit's going to be available just for a year or something like that, or the furniture is super, super neutral, it can work better. But in general, I'd say 8 or 9 times out of 10, it makes sense for a long-term rental to be unfurnished.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with that, especially because generally long-term rental, they're already here.
Usually.
They're probably not shipping their $20,000 couch across Canada.
To be honest, I've had people tenants come all the way from India and they're like, I'm shipping my furniture.
Crazy.
Yeah. I think maybe these days shipping furniture is not the crazy expense it is, or maybe it's just worth it for some people. Or they just say, hey, I'm shipping some of it and I'm buying all new stuff and I'm going to buy the stuff that I want, not the stuff that you already have in the unit. As well, a lot of times it's just out of convenience. It's not out of trying to provide better value for the rental at all, right? The owner just says, I've got this crappy old couch that's in there and I can't be bothered to remove it. So let's just leave it in. Somebody will want it, right? If you don't want it, so why would somebody else? It's usually the kind of the way it goes.
And it is of note, by the way, that now we've seen at 2 different instances, Burnaby Brentwood area and the furnished rental units, that demonstrate that if we get more homes to rent quickly, suddenly prices soften a little bit, i.e. go down, or at least are open to negotiation. So if we have anybody with more of the power up there in the government or whatnot, part of the solution, I think, to make rents more affordable is to make more rental properties. I know that this is usually where it's interjected. You're just saying that because you're a property manager. I'm also saying that because the math looks like it has proven this twice that we just covered.
100%. Wherever there's been a saturation of units, and to be honest, I think there's been a bit of a saturation of units all over the place, at least all over in Metro Vancouver, and the prices are stagnating from last year.
So, I mean, sort of... Maybe the change that they made to make all of these places rentable now might have helped. I was always pushing for that anyway, so I was really happy when they said no more rental restrictions, because every time on the sales side, I'd have to go and look around and there'd be wait lists and stuff. So it's like, well, people obviously want to rent these places out, but they can't.
For sure. So. Yeah, I think maybe it's a combination of all these little changes. we'll just have to monitor it over the next couple of years and see if the trend kind of continues or if, the rents just shoot up and skyrocket again.
Yeah,
next year it's tough to say.
Yeah, my crystal ball's in the shop, so we'll have to figure that out. Speaking of the rental prices, the average price per square foot for all of Greater Vancouver combined is $3.04, with Vancouver being the most expensive at $4.43 per square foot, Burnaby at $3.58, and New West at $2.94. This is a giant gap, though, between like Vancouver proper and the average square price per square foot. Like $3.04 to $4.43 is a pretty big hop.
Yeah.
So I'm not really sure what's powering that. I mean, do you think maybe it's the sunshine tax that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think especially in the summer, Vancouver proper gets very, the rental market gets much hotter.
Yeah.
Very specifically in Vancouver. Obviously it does in other places, but I think specifically for whatever reason, the downtown Vancouver in particular, and this, the very close surrounding areas, they get very, very busy in the summer, and the prices go up. What I also see in the summer is that places that are nearby, maybe this is kind of anecdotal, but places that are nearby hospitals and places where near doctors work, because doctors always start like in June, their new residencies. They always start their new residencies in June, July, and August. Or at least they move or a little bit earlier for their residencies when they start.
Okay.
So I always get a huge influx of inquiries from doctors or resident doctors.
Yeah.
And they always want to live in nice places because they've got more dough to throw around. So I think that also might drive it as well.
Yeah.
That I don't see doctors come in the winter.
Yeah, fair enough.
And so potentially could be a reason for the price increase.
Yeah, I mean, I also see generally, again, anecdotal, that around water, like Kitts, English Bay, they pick up for sure.
Kitts especially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
the beach, man.
Last year in August, I was renting a couple places in Kitts for way more, like $700 more than I'd probably be able to rent it for.
Yeah.
In October, November, December. So
yeah. So there is the sunshine tax. So maybe that's what's driving the prices. Just some hypothesis, of course. Don't take us to the bank on it.
Yeah.
The most common type of home available right now for rent is apartments. As usual, always will be, I'm pretty sure. I mean, we live in a city, so they take up 70.8%, with partial house being the second most available at 17.8%. Thoughts on the driving factors for that, for the houses? I mean, I don't think it's the Airbnb because they can still do that.
Yeah. I'm surprised that it's not a little bit higher. That seems pretty low to me. But it's not unsurprising that apartments are, by far and away the largest thing. There's still lots of investors in the city. Still a lot of people renting out their properties. So
yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that probably the partial thing is coming from the fact, I mean, we just had a slight reduction in the mortgage rates, but I'm thinking that there's a lot of renewals that are coming up and they weren't really showing any signs of declining very quickly. They still haven't declined very quickly. So I'm thinking maybe that a lot of the partial rental is people with the basement suite thinking like, I need the help
for sure. I mean, even a small reduction, it's still nowhere near the free money of the last 10 years that people were used to. So
yeah, exactly right. So I think that maybe some people are seeing that renewal coming down the road, inching closer, and then thinking, maybe I need extra help to beef up this renewal.
For sure.
Now I have noticed especially on Facebook Marketplace, of course, that there's a lot of people that are renting out just rooms, creating like a roommate situation. One working theory is that they're trying to get around the Airbnb stuff because it's a roommate situation, therefore not
a short-term rental.
Yeah, I'm wondering.
Not even a real tenancy situation, just like a roommate. Yeah,
because the RTB doesn't deal with
roommates or anything like that.
So I'm curious to see if that is the reason.
Yeah, so I'm part of all these like little rental groups on my Facebook account. I don't really post them because every time I do, I get a bunch of nasty comments about how
you're ruining the rental market,
ruining the city, and all this stuff. Right? Of course, you get all these horrible comments. But on my Facebook account, I'm not friends with anybody, or I have like 5 friends because it's my business account, right?
Yeah.
So the only things that pop up are all of these postings. Yeah. So every now and then I just scroll through and look at all these different postings. And yeah, I've seen a ton of, I'm doing quotations right now for the people who can't see me, quoting that rooms, because some of these aren't even rooms. They're like a solarium with like a tiny little bed in it. Renting for like $1,000 a month. Yeah. So people are definitely doing stuff like that, and probably to try and close the gap between what they used to be getting on Airbnb and what they're now able to get if they just did a regular standard tenancy.
Yeah.
Because sometimes that gap was like, $5,000 difference per month, right? Some of the gaps would have been huge. So not surprising that people are trying anything.
Nice. Right. People are just trying to get by, basically, right?
Yeah.
So, speaking of, I had talked earlier about live.rent. Now, they've reported that 2-bedroom units are about 45% of the available stock, 1-bedrooms are about 43%. I've been seeing that sort of thing. I've been finding lately that my 1-bedroom units are moving a lot quicker than my 2-bedroom units. Have you been finding the same thing, or just about the same? Or?
Yeah, 1-bedrooms are usually easier, mostly because it really depends on who you accept for tenants, I find. Because usually a 1-bedroom will have a couple in it, but normally landlords want a couple to be in a 2-bedroom as well. Mm-hmm. But that's just more expensive and sometimes they could just rent a 1-bed, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So sometimes I've seen people reach out and say, oh, it's 2 couples, which would be 4 people in a 2-bed, which some owners are not interested in. Mm-hmm. Some are. So I would say it's just because of the cost. It's quite expensive to rent a 2-bed. Yeah. And if you've got a couple sharing a 1-bed, it's more financially feasible.
Yeah, especially I find for the investors that investing in the 1-bed or even the 1-and-den, but more towards the 1-bed is a fairly sound investment, simply for the fact that you get a higher turnover. And as currently we don't have rent control, but as that happens, a tenant leaves every 2-3 years. They move in as a single person, have a couple, then they living together, and then they usually want to have a baby or whatnot. They need more space, and so they move on. So it sort of inherently lets the investor gradually raise their rent over time without having to do it at the 3% or whatever is dictated. So it's kind of I would suggest a better investment on the rental side to get the 1-bedroom. However, on the resale side, obviously a 2-bedroom will go up in value more than a 1-bedroom usually. So it depends on how you want to go or what your plan is. If you're a long-term planning to hold this for 20 years, I'd say maybe get a 1-bedroom because you'll be able to flip your tenants gradually, make more rent on the way, and then cover your net, whatnot. Or if you're planning to get out of it earlier, 2-bedroom will make more money when you go to sell.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense.
So the top 5 most expensive places in Canada are back to being all BC. We did it. Way to go, guys. Way to go. With West Van being number 1, followed by North Van, Vancouver Vancouver proper, Burnaby, and Richmond rounding out the rest. BC is really expensive.
Very expensive. And these 5, I'm not surprised by really at all, just based on, the fact that they're in BC, but as well, based on the kind of units that are available and the new buildings in Richmond and Burnaby. Yeah. Unsurprising that those are on the top 5.
Yeah, I spoke with Jensen. We'll have his show coming up next month. He was talking about insurance and that, but he's also a property manager. He lives out in Richmond. One of the things that he pointed out as well is that with the airport being so close, I never took this into account, but he is saying that a lot of airline workers, because they kind of transfer, so they're always coming in. Yeah. And which in turn
makes sense. I mean, if you probably wouldn't want to live in North Van if you were like a flight attendant or something like that. It wouldn't make any sense.
Exactly, right?
Take an hour to get home.
And so therefore what we were just talking about with the flipping of the tenants, you can charge whatever you want for the rent. So
for sure.
Now all of a sudden you can pop your rent $200. That on an average will make the rent go up. So
yeah, no, that's definitely some good insight.
Yeah, it's an interesting theory. Hard to test, of course. I guess we'll find out over time because the MLS is now holding rentals, which is kind of neat. So we're actually getting real world stats on that because you never get to see it on like Craigslist. I guess Facebook asks you how much you rented it for, but when you rent it on there, but the MLS will be able to hold more of these stats so we can maybe start to build a better picture
kind of a database of rents over time.
Yeah, like actual rents.
Actual things rented as opposed to just listed.
Yeah, like, I mean, we use some of the stats from live.rent as well as our own sales through Vancouver Rent It and the rest of the property managers sort of thing as a pool to figure out where we're at. But I think having the MLS as an additional source would be a pretty good.
Yeah. The more data is always better.
Absolutely, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that would be a good thing to come into you more for that transparency. I guess we were talking about last month.
Yeah.
So we'll see what's going on that. One of the things that happened this past month, though, is I got a phone call actually from a place that I'd worked with, and the police actually had to show up for a conflict between a landlord and a tenant over collecting the rent. Mm-hmm. This is just a simple tip for all the landlords out there. Just stick to the forms.
Yeah.
To be perfectly honest, like whether they're paying in cash or not, if they haven't dropped off the rent, just send in the form, because you're going to need a paper trail if you end up at the RTB anyways.
Yeah.
So this way you absolutely avoid the physical whatever. I'm not even sure what all happened because we aren't managing it, of course. But yeah, just as a tip to all the landlords, just stick to the forms.
Like, yeah, no reason to get into a big confrontation or anything like that. It's not going to help anybody. So,
well, exactly. I mean, maybe do a quick phone call, because a lot of times, like a tenant's, late. Oh, I forgot, or I've been out of town, or whatever it may be.
There's usually a relatively good reason, and if there's not a good reason, then you don't want to show up at the person's house anyway.
Exactly. Yeah. Just send a form. Make sure you do it all by the book, because if you're gonna try to collect that rent later, it's going to be at the RTB. They're going to want a paper trail. So just stick to the forms. You can find all the forms if you're managing it yourself, at the RTB. So just search RTB unpaid rent. I'm sure the form will come up. And this way you'll avoid, talking to the cops.
Yeah, definitely a good tip.
Yeah, it's simple solutions for simple problems. We also had a question emailed by one of our listeners. So thank you, Michael, for the question about routine inspections, which we probably should do an entire show on this, actually, which we can and likely will be. But what are some of the items that you're looking for when you're doing your routine inspections throughout a tenancy to make sure that everything's on the up and up?
Well, first, just kind of like the big stuff, making sure that there's nothing like super obviously wrong. Is there a pet in the unit when there's not supposed to be? Are there, too many occupants in the unit? Are there more beds than there's supposed to be?
Yeah.
The kind of big stuff, that's really obvious right when you walk in. Mm-hmm. As well, usually what I specifically look for is areas where water is being used. So the bathroom, 100%. Is a really good place to look, obviously. Any of the caulking around the toilet or the tub or the shower or the sink, making sure that caulking is still functioning and sealed. As well, making sure that there's not water sitting anywhere, right? And if the tenant just took a shower 10 minutes ago and there's a tiny bit of splash of water on the floor, no problem. But if the tenant hasn't been in the shower for the whole day and there's water sitting somewhere, why is that water sitting somewhere, and finding that out. Checking all the appliances to make sure that they're being used properly as kind of best you can. Usually it would be the washer dryer, like the vent and stuff like that, making sure that's because it's a major fire hazard. So those are kind of the main things that I would look for. Anything that's kind of super overtly hazardous, or anything to do with water, because water just always causes the most damage, out of pretty much anything.
Yeah, for sure. Doubling on that one for the washer dryer, I always look to make sure if they have a booster that it's on. Mm-hmm. Sometimes it gets bumped, whatever, the switch gets bumped somehow, whatever. If that booster's not running, it usually ends up with problems because it doesn't have enough power to push out the lint and whatnot from the exhaust, and it gets stuck, and then you start leaking in the ceiling.
Yeah, condensation in the ceiling.
Yeah. And speaking of condensation, we were just talking about this off air before we were about windows and condensation during the winter time. That I recommend doing at least one of your inspections during the winter.
Yeah.
Just so you can check to see what's going on. Because a lot of people, it's counterintuitive to crack your window open when it's minus 10.
It's cold outside.
Right? Yeah. It's absolutely counterintuitive. But that will stop the condensation. I don't need to go through all the science of it, but when hot meets cold, it makes water generally.
Yeah.
So that is definitely one of the things to go through. I generally check my places usually about at least a minimum of 2 times a year. What about you? Like, do you?
I'll usually do with a new tenancy. I'll usually do a 3-month inspection.
Okay.
Just kind of 3 months into the tenancy. Hey, how's it going? Making sure everything's fine. And to be honest, when we're talking about inspections, we're not going into the inspection with like the purpose of trying to find stuff wrong.
No.
For the most part, just going in there and saying hi to the tenant and, is there anything else you need? Is there anything that is broken but you maybe haven't mentioned it because you thought it was too little? Just anything. We're just kind of trying to create a good relationship with the tenant and kind of an open line of communication. Obviously, we're looking for things that are wrong, but we're not going in there hoping that that's the case or trying to get people in trouble or whatever.
Yeah, like we're not checking on the tenant. We're checking on the unit.
Yeah, really just looking to make sure that everything's fine with the unit. And sometimes it can be something that the tenant maybe didn't really notice. Mm-hmm. And maybe it was something they were inadvertently doing that was causing some small issue. And then kind of correcting that. So I usually do a 3-month inspection and then annually after that. Okay. If there's a reason to do, if there's been maybe say like you talked about reports of condensation in the unit before, then I would maybe do it more often than that just to make sure. And then I've got some owners that require inspections more frequently because of their insurance. Yeah. Like every 4 months or 3 months, which is quite a bit in my opinion, but if it's for insurance purposes, would still do that as well.
Of course, yeah. So some of those insurance want like a lot of inspections, and it's like that someone lives here, right?
Yeah, the most one I've seen was every 3 months, which is quite often, especially for like a little 1-bedroom condo where nothing's gone wrong, and it does feel a little silly when you go in and the tenant is like the perfect tenant. You go in there every time, and the place is like completely clean, spotless, and you go. Why am I here? Yeah. But it's still good to do, especially if it's, mandated by insurance.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think we covered most of what's going on for June in the rentals. You got anything to add that's been burning in your soul?
I think that's pretty much it. I think it's kind of a little obvious by the stats this year that it's been a bit of a slower market. Some things are taking a little bit longer to rent than maybe we were used to in previous years. But we're still carrying on. Business
always keeps on clicking.
Business as usual. Yeah.
Alrighty. Well, thank you very much for listening. If you've been listening this long, we really appreciate it. Be sure to like and subscribe so that you'll be up to date with all of the goings-ons in the Vancouver property management and investment world. So this is Hayes Hartwig and Peter Arnould. Thank you so much for tuning in. This has been Bamboo, Vancouver's property management and investment podcast.